Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! 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 The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves, world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios, the Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, as we wrap up our weekend for the Atlanta Braves. And I guess that's how time works in general. We have reached Sunday evening, and once again, I get to come on and tell you something that last week had been the first time in 10 weeks, but this one is double official because this game started on a Sunday, it ended on a Sunday, and the Braves won a baseball game. So they had to start last weekend's Speedway Classic on Saturday, then push it to Sunday, but they physically won a game on a Sunday, so we were kind of, saying, all right, kind of nice. A little bit of a different tone for the show. I know it's not going to change the tone of the season, but the Braves over the course of the weekend, though, had to feel a little bit better about themselves because what they were able to do was get up off the decks after getting knocked around by the Milwaukee Brewers, who, spoiler alert, have been knocking everybody around for a while. They're the hottest team in baseball. They swept the Braves in a 3-game series to start the homestand, and you kind of started thinking, well, it's already pretty bad. Can it get worse? Well, after the Brewers, it was going to be the red-hot Miami Marlins, who have been one of the best clubs in baseball for basically the last month and a half. And the Braves stopped them dead in their tracks by taking 4 out of 5 at Truist Park, including the rare doubleheader sweep on Saturday, and then proceeded to finish things off by taking 4 out of 5 and winning behind Joey Wentz on Sunday. We'll get into the Hurston Waldrep of it all. He's obviously a big player for the Braves rotation right now and one that should be getting plenty of attention. And a guy that I think, if you do look at what the Braves are trying to do down the stretch, to a certain extent, yeah, you're liking what you're seeing out of Joey Wentz. But Hurston Waldrep, a couple of years ago, first-round draft pick by the Braves, you knew the pedigree was there. The hopes, the expectations, obviously very high for those kinds of players. And now we're getting to see a little bit of what he can offer. We saw it Saturday afternoon with another great start from him. And then you saw the Braves finish business in the bottom half against, well, at least name-wise, one of the better pitchers in baseball, Sandy Alcantara, though, goodness knows, the results have not matched the pedigree of Alcantara. And you watch this stuff, and you think that it should. But for whatever reason, it's not. And the irony of ironies, I feel like, at least one of them, maybe not the biggest of all the ironies, if we're ranking them. But Marcell Ozuna was traded by the Marlins to the Cardinals for Sandy Alcantara and others. Zach Gallen was in that trade. It seems like every time Marcell Ozuna faces the guy that he was traded for from the Marlins, he just wears that guy out. Alcantara gave up 2 more home runs to Marcell Ozuna, who was a big part of the Braves' big weekend resurgence. And I think one of the questions we're going to ask and talk about is Marcell Ozuna back? Is he back on track? Is he just feeling better at the plate? Is he feeling better physically and thus feeling better overall at the plate? Because the power, I can tell you this, I got some numbers that will back up my thesis or my overall hypothesis that Marcell Ozuna is indeed back from the power hitting department, and the Braves will take that down the stretch. I mean, we were talking a week ago, and it really more than a week ago when the trade deadline was, but for the purposes of this show, we didn't get to talk until Sunday because, again, that's how time works. And Marcell Ozuna, you thought, well, some club's going to look at that resume and say, we'll take it. We'll take a flyer on a guy that has averaged the last couple of years 40 homers and 100 runs batted in and see if we can inject that power into our lineup and maybe find a guy that could help down the stretch. But the Braves found no takers from Marcell Ozuna. And Alex Anthopoulos said, look, we didn't even have a trade offer to take to Marcell, who had 10-5 right, so that he could even consider whether or not he wanted to go to a new city to close out the year. So it was a strange turn of events, and Raisel Iglesias also didn't go anywhere. But I think what we've seen out of him, at least lately, and by lately, I mean we're starting to build up a pretty good sample size, has me wondering, what's Raisel Iglesias' future in Atlanta? So we'll get into that a little bit later in the show as well. But overall, I think a very good weekend for the Atlanta Braves, to put it lightly, a weekend that began on a Thursday. And I want to talk about one guy on this show, and I will, because it's my show, and because he's the guy that we definitely need to circle in red right now, is Drake Baldwin. We saw the Drake Baldwin show over the first 3 days of this Miami series. Really, I mean, this is a guy that we've known for a while is capable of doing great things, that has put himself in position to earn as much playing time as possible. And I know that's kind of a moving target because Marcell Ozuna getting hot and needing to get some playing time for Sean Murphy. It's going to be a little bit of a moving target. I don't know. Some fans may feel like the goalposts are moving a little bit because it wasn't too long ago that we were talking about, all right, Marcell Ozuna, he'll play when he plays, but it's going to be Murphy and Baldwin down the stretch. And for the most part, I think that it will be. And I feel like the caveat was always, these are catchers. You don't want to never give them a day off. But if Ozuna is going to hit home runs and be a big part of some winning, the Braves are still going to try to do some of that down the stretch. And even though for a lot of folks you may look at it and think, well, isn't that counterproductive because we're kind of trying to close in on a number 1 overall draft pick and higher odds in the lottery? Yeah, that is true. And I think that would certainly be nice in a lost season to get the best draft position you can get and the best player that you can get, quite obviously. But the Braves would have to do a lot of winning to change their odds in the draft lottery. And what do I mean by a lot of winning? Well, let's just consider where they are right now. After the Braves won this game on Sunday, 51-67, so 16 games under 500. They were pushing, after the Milwaukee sweep especially, to potentially fall 20 games under 500, which is a statement I did not think I would be making, not just this year, but anytime soon for a Braves club that's as talented as this club is, but that's where they found themselves. The inability to win series in the second half is when the ship that was taken on water really began to sink below and take on so much so that you just knew this season wasn't going to go where you needed it to. It was heading toward the bottom of the Atlantic. It's just kind of what it felt like. Be that as it may, the Miami Marlins, who came in, I'm sure, looking to keep their momentum going, they ran into what I would refer to as Miami's boogeyman. The Braves have been that for years. You look at the season series between these two teams, and given the Braves have been a club that's been perennially in contention. The Marlins, with the exception of a couple of years, getting into the postseason and making themselves a bit of a pesky team, an up-and-coming team, they haven't been able to do the consistent winning, and they have not been able to consistently beat the Atlanta Braves. And we saw that trend again over the weekend. And I feel like there's always this point for clubs that are on the rise, and I'm going to have Craig Mish on. He covers the Miami Marlins. He's on the FanDuel Sports Network down there. He's also on Sports Grid. I've been on Craig's show. He's been on this show quite a bit. Covers the Marlins better than anybody. He's seen them good, bad, indifferent. All three in one season doesn't really matter. But, you know, when a club goes from trying to put all the pieces together to taking those steps towards becoming a real winning team, and I think that, and I don't want to take anything away from them, even though they just lost 4 out of 5 to the Atlanta Braves, who are going through their worst season in the better part of a decade, or at least this decade. I think the Marlins are a club that's starting to figure some stuff out. They've hit on some deals. They've got some nice arms. Their bullpen, which was not good in this series overall, has been pretty solid. And I think that they're taking some steps in the right direction, and they made a very interesting decision, and maybe the decision was made for them by how bad the year was and not feeling like the return would be worth it. They held on to Sandy Alcantara, who I do think, again, is a much better pitcher than we have seen thus far this year and that we saw over the weekend. And I feel like that sends a message to a young club as well. You start doing a little bit of winning, you get to the trade deadline, and the big guy upstairs says, all right, where are the veterans? We're sending them all out. Well, that would probably not send a great message to a club that's just trying to find its identity. And I think that's kind of where the Marlins are. But again, this is not a show all about the Miami Marlins. Just those are some thoughts that I have, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth in hour number 2 when we have Craig Mish join the program and kind of break down what has led the Marlins to be where they are. Because, I mean, call a spade and look at the standings. If you told me in the second week of August we'll be talking about the Marlins making a push toward the wild card and above the Braves in the standings, I would have needed a very detailed breakdown of what things went wrong, more so for the Braves, than taking anything away from what Miami has done. But this is the world we live in. These are the events that have happened. You can do everything that you feel like to build the roster, but you can't necessarily control a lot once the games happen on the field. And for the Braves this year, some of the controlling the controllables has not really worked out so well. And then some things have obviously gone wrong for Atlanta, especially the second half and toward the second half with the injuries to the starting rotation. But some good news this week. Chris Sale was able to throw off the mound at Truist Park. I was there on Thursday. Looked pretty good. Looked like he hadn't missed any time at all. And more importantly, afterwards, Chris Sale obviously feeling very good because he's going to be making a start on Tuesday for AAA Gwinnett. And I think if all goes well, then the Braves will be able to welcome Chris Sale back as soon as he's eligible. I believe it's the 19th of the month that he'll be eligible to come off the injured list after being put on the 60-day IL with those couple of cracked ribs that he suffered. We'll hear from Chris Sale a little bit later in the show. Got some interesting comments from him on a number of different fronts. Obviously, everybody wants to know how he's feeling, what the next steps are. I just told you about that, short version of that. But then a lot of people have kind of looked at Chris Sale and to some extent Spencer Strider. And I've heard this commentary on this station and others. And obviously social media is a wonderful place where we can hear all kinds of discussions. Some we sign up for, some we don't. About why not just shut everybody of any matter of importance down and just wrap them up and bubble wrap until next spring. It's just not how that works. If you were later on in the season where there's like a week to go, I get it. Like maybe at that point, there's just no reason to push it. And I don't know if it's a week or 10 days or whatever, but when you're sitting here 6-7 weeks away from the end of the season, the message that you send the rest of the club by basically deciding that, well, so-and-so is healthy, we're just not going to play them, but we need you to go out there and play. I just feel like that's a non-starter for clubs. It's intellectually dishonest on a number of levels to think that way, so just want to throw that out there. If you're offended, I'm sorry, but not sorry as well. You need to maintain some continuity inside the four walls of that clubhouse about what effort level is expected when you go out there on the field. And Alex Anthopoulos talked about that in part. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he basically said, look, how can we as an organization ask everybody else to go out there and continue to play hard if we decide, well, this guy's perfectly fine. He could play. He wants to play, but we won't let him play. And that's not to say anything of what you might hear from the players' union about keeping healthy players on the injured list even though they've completely checked out and could play. I don't know. I would not want to have that conversation personally. I have no skin in this whatsoever. Players Association is probably not going to call me and ask me my opinion when the show's over or while the show's going on, but we'll let you know if they do. But either way, I just think that all jokes aside, and in all seriousness, which is basically the same statement, that you have to let players go and play if they're healthy enough to go out and compete. And that's kind of the message that you're going to hear, I think, from Chris Sale. And as much as my opinion or anybody else's opinion that can crack a microphone is one thing, when you hear it from the player, you start to understand. And there's some reasons why he wants to come back and pitch again this year. And the last reason that I'll throw out there is you can try to manage away from injury, but there is absolutely no guarantee that it is going to work. An injury can happen at virtually any time in a game to essentially any player in a game. It's just the nature of things. You can't manage away from that, I guess is my point. So I'm going to take my soapbox. I'm going to put it back underneath the desk here. We're going to get into some of this a little bit later when we do hear from Chris Sale. We're also going to hear from Hurston Waldrep, who had a very, very good start on Saturday, on his progression, on what has helped him unlock his potential and turn it into results. And we're going to talk about a few Braves hitters who are starting to show you some things that you need to see. Michael Harris II, Marcell Ozuna, Drake Baldwin, the likes. We'll get into that. And you're also going to hear from Braves legend Dale Murphy, 35 years ago, traded to the Philadelphia Phillies. I'll share a conversation I had with him about how exactly that went down. All of that and more is coming your way right here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday here in Midtown. Weather for the weekend was able to hold up. The Braves were able to get all of their action in without having to stare at that ugly tarp, which we've had to do a bit more than we've liked to. But they got their doubleheader in on Saturday, won both of those games, and closed out the weekend winning, you guessed it, yet another game on Sunday. It took 4 out of 5 from the Miami Marlins in 5-game series. They haven't had one, I believe it was 3 years ago, 2022, if I heard right on the broadcast with Brandon Gaudin and C.J. Nitkowski. You just don't really schedule a lot of 5-game series, and obviously this one wasn't on the schedule as a 5-gamer. These two teams were rained out back in April, but they had to find a time to make up that game, and it forced them into 5 games in 4 days, and the Braves were able to pass that test with flying colors by taking 4 out of those 5. And as I was talking about when we opened up here, I mean, this was a Braves club that after that sweep at the hands of the Milwaukee Brewers, who just continue to impress. I mean, the Brewers have been, over the last month and a half, about as hot gets. Scalding. They have gone, it's measured in centigrade as opposed to Fahrenheit or Celsius. I mean, this has been very impressive run by the Milwaukee Brewers. And they did work against the Braves in the first 3 games of this homestand. And Atlanta was pushing down or trending down towards being 20 games under 500, which is a place that the Braves, prior to this season, had not found themselves since 2017, which was the tail end of the rebuild. And this was not a Braves team that came into this year looking or thinking about a rebuild or thinking about those kinds of results, but that's kind of where they've found themselves by some shaky play in the first half, underperformance of the offense, which I would say for March to April, May, June was the number one problem for this club. The starting rotation, meanwhile, was holding things together. It was keeping pressure off of the bullpen, but once you pulled those pins out, it's like a game of Jenga. Once you started pulling, for A.J. Smith-Shawver, I mean, you already were dealing without Ronaldo Lopez, and all of a sudden it's Chris Sale and Spencer Schwellenbach back-to-back, and then Grant Holmes for good measure after that. And that whole pile of sticks just hit the ground, and you don't get to start over in the middle of the season. You have to make the best of it. And the Braves have been trying to cobble together a rotation. I'm going to talk a lot about that a little more later when it comes to Hurston Waldrep, when it comes to Joey Wentz, when it comes to the role of Spencer Strider, what's going on with him, the return of Chris Sale. I mean, there are some pieces that you have here that could start to resemble a little bit more of a rotation than the Braves have been working with for about a month and a half. So that'll be a good thing. But I figured we'd get into something that's even better than that. Even better than an injured rotation, you say. Yes, there are a lot of things better than that. Maybe the bright spot for the Braves this year. And I don't know if the maybe is even necessary at this point because it is pushing the middle of August, has been Drake Baldwin. Drake Baldwin coming into spring training. I remember talking to him when pitchers and catchers reported. And it's his second big league camp, I believe, at least his second. And I kind of asked him, all right, well, what's it like for you this year? What are you looking to do? You're building off a great year a season ago where he was dynamite once he was promoted to AAA Gwinnett. He played in the Futures game, hit a homer there, had a little bit of that helium, if you will, as far as the prospect's concerned. He was rising. And so all of that seemed to be in good perspective for him. And now it's like, well, look, coming in to learn. I learned a lot from Travis d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy last year. I'm looking to learn even more this year. But by the time you got to opening day, well, Sean Murphy unfortunately didn't make it to opening day because he got hit by a pitch in Grapefruit League play. And the keys to the castle behind the plate were handed to Drake Baldwin. And all he's done is take this opportunity and run with it. You look at what Drake was doing over this past week. I mean, he's up to 289 on the year with an on-base just under 360 and a slugging percentage approaching 480. He's got 13 homers and 51 runs knocked in 294 plate appearances. He got the day off on Sunday. But he batted 360 on this homestand with 10 runs knocked in. That began on Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 10 runs batted in for Drake Baldwin over the course of those few days. His first career multi-homer game came on Thursday, another feather in the cap. And you start to look at, all right, Rookie of the Year, I'm not going to say the race is over. It's not over yet. There's still sufficient time for other players to make a case. Isaac Collins we saw with Milwaukee. Of course, we've heard all about Jacob Misiorowski, but you've thrown 40-ish innings. He's on the IL right now. Should come off, though, and we'll have an opportunity to continue to make a case there. But as much as putting him on the All-Star game, All-Star roster made some sense to me because it's an exhibition. You're looking to get eyeballs on it, and Misiorowski was certainly attracting a lot of attention. To win an award, you have to have a sample size, I think, that is enough for everyone in this voting body, the baseball writers, to look at it and say, okay, on its merits, here's the case, and this is why he should be ahead of this guy or this guy or this guy. And I just don't know that Misiorowski is going to get enough innings to do that. And it also presupposes, to use that word, that he's going to continue to pitch and find success in the way that he has thus far. And I'm not saying he won't, but this is baseball. You go through the league one time, then you come back through. There's more video. And maybe hitters start to figure you out. Maybe your command's not as sharp. I mean, it's a constant game of adjustment. So I'm not trying to take anything off the shine that is the season that Jacob Misiorowski has put together, but I just feel like you have to, if you're a pitcher, you have to pitch, I think, quite a bit to leapfrog a position player. And I'll give you a great example of that. 2022, where there was a gentleman named Michael Harris II. who won the National League Rookie of the Year award, and deservedly so. There was another gentleman on that roster named Spencer Strider, who in about 130-ish innings struck out 204 batters and did not win the Rookie of the Year award. And maybe that goes to, they split the vote, and Michael Harris just kind of got the bigger end of that. But most years, I would tell you what Spencer Strider did was more than enough with a sub-3 ERA and 200 strikeouts as a rookie pitcher to win a Rookie of the Year award. But that, I think, just kind of underscores how much more you have to do as a pitcher to leapfrog some of the position players if there is a position player like Drake Baldwin who's putting together such a great year. I did look up the odds coming into this as far as that's concerned. Rookie of the Year odds. Minus 250 is where Drake Baldwin is as of before today's game, and he didn't play today, so I don't guess it moved very much. Not that that matters. Everyone else plus 2,000. I think there were 9 more guys on this list I saw. It was on Fox Sports. That's a pretty sizable thing. If you believe in this stuff, and I'm not telling you to do it, I'm not telling you not to do it, but I'm just saying if you're into that sort of thing, it does shine a very nice light, a spotlight, if you will, on Drake Baldwin's case for Rookie of the Year. I think it's a very good one. That is the most obvious statement that I will make on the show. I promise you that. And I think that Drake Baldwin, more importantly, for what the Braves are looking to do, not just this year, which may not have been anything close to the season they wanted, but moving forward, to know that you've still got those pieces, those building blocks to have success, Drake Baldwin's pushed his name into that discussion as well. Great rookie season for him. Now, speaking of former Rookie of the Years, I brought up Michael Harris a second. Let's talk about his last 25 games coming into Sunday. And all he did, by the way, on Sunday was get 2 more hits and hit another homer. So these numbers get even better. But just last 25 games coming into the day, hitting .354 with an OPS just over 1,000, with 5 homers, 11 runs knocked in, and 16 runs scored over that stretch. It's just before the All-Star break. It was the final game, I believe, of the St. Louis series, or final 2 games of that St. Louis series for Michael Harris. But 1 month's time, this is what Harris has done. He was hitting .205 on the 10th of July when the Braves wrapped up their series out in Sacramento against the formerly Oakland Athletics. Since then, by hitting basically .360 over the last month, he's batting .241 on the season, and his OPS has jumped from .539 to nearly .660. So his numbers are starting to look a little bit more like numbers that you could think, all right, well, if this is the low point, you can bounce back. You can come up from there. But Michael Harris has been on the come up here for a while now. Got a solid month under his belt. The changes that he has made seem to be real and sustainable. He seems to be comfortable at the plate, and the results are finally there. So good to see that from Michael Harris II. You needed to see that, let's be honest, because the dialogue and the narrative around Mike, going through the month of June into July. Again, I don't use social media as, my indicator for how life works, and I suggest you not do that either. But there were a lot of people who said they'd be very happy to help him pack the certain brand of vehicle that he gives away each year and drive him on over to Gwinnett. And that's on probably the nicer end of some of the things that were being said. But look, this is a game of failure. I remember talking to Charlie Morton about this a year ago, and I said, well, all the experience that you've had in your career, it's the best teacher, right? And he goes, no, failure is the best teacher. And baseball is a game of failure. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten. And this, again, I don't know if I grab my soapbox and drag it back out here, but baseball is a sport that reminds you, I think, more so on an individual basis about how often you can not get the outcome you're looking for. It's true of all sports. Trust me, I know how competition works. I get it. I'm not suggesting that we give everyone a participation ribbon for going out there and, putting their feelings on the line. But that's what this is finding a way to adjust to the adjustments that the league makes to you. And that's kind of what I was getting at with Jacob Mizorowski a little bit earlier. Everybody has to do it. And I think Michael Harris has shown in the past that he can make those adjustments. In 23 and 24, each of those seasons, he had to turn it on in the second half to really get going to where he wants to. Now, he's doing it again for a third year. But this year, unlike those years, it didn't involve, hey, Mike's going to be on the IL for 30 days or more. So it wasn't, hey, shut it down for a while. It wasn't dealing with the back injury, I think it was, in 23, or the hamstring thing that he dealt with last year. This was just, man, you're in the soup. Like, you are in the grind. And the only way to get through this is to go straight through it. And I think Mike really did that. So kudos to him. Hopefully this continues, but some things that you absolutely needed to see from him. Now, a couple other things I think that are of note for the Braves offense. Jurickson Profar at leadoff. Now I'm on the record here as saying I don't know if I want to live in a world where Jurickson Profar needs to get the most at-bats of anybody on the Braves roster. That's just a statement I'll leave right there. But necessity, I think, is the mother of all invention, and the Braves had to try some different things. So one of those was bumping Ronald Acuña Jr. down to give him some chances to drive in some more runs. Unfortunately, Ronald Acuña Jr. was dealing with that calf strain. But I do have some good news about that, and then I'll get back to Profar. Acuña's taking batting practice over the weekend and running, doing drills on the field. David O'Brien talking about this from The Athletic prior to the game on Sunday. Said Acuña looked very, very good. That's a huge sign. And we'll see. Now, he's eligible to come off the injured list anytime the Braves want to activate him. It's a 10-day stint. It sounded like when he went on, which again was the 29th or 30th, right around the trade deadline, I think that it was 2 to 3 weeks. They'll take their time with him. They'll figure out what they need to do. But the fact that Ronald's out there and clearly looking and feeling like Ronald Acuña Jr., hitting balls to the far reaches of Truist Park prior to games, and running without really any semblance of needing to hold himself back, I think are good things to see. And again, we'll get into the Chris Sale commentary and all of the reasons why you would want to see somebody play. But I'll give you one of them right now, and we'll hear from Chris Sale here in just a little while. But you want to end the season feeling like you were as healthy as you could be and you accomplished everything you needed to in that year and didn't just close out the year on the IL on a rehab program going into the winter. And I think that's going to be true for Ronald Acuña Jr. as well, which I think sometimes people kind of apply their own impression of Ronald and they think that's who he is or that's who he's not. This is a guy, I can tell you this, who cares and who wants to compete and who wants to be on the field, who loves the game of baseball. It's going to be pretty hard to tell that guy, hey, you're healthy? Cool, take a seat. Take a number. We'll get back to you in 2026. I don't agree with it. And again, we don't have to get into all that and spend all of our time on that. But Jurickson Profar at leadoff, he is getting on base. I was looking at this and give him the credit. Sunday, another multi-hit game. In the 8 games coming into Sunday, he racked up 10 walks. So you talk about a leadoff hitter doing what he needs to do, pushing about a 400 on base over the last little stretch of time. It's pretty good. But 226 overall since he took over at leadoff for Ronald Acuña Jr. On base at 374 is not bad. Again, I think that in the long term, when you get healthy Ronald Acuña Jr. in the optimal Braves lineup, I think you'll see Ronald where he belongs, which to me is still the number one spot in the lineup. So those are a few things going on with the Atlanta Braves lineup. We got more of them to get to a little bit later on, but when we come back, we're going to discuss a little bit about what's happening with the Braves rotation and the big jolt they could get from having Chris Sale back. And we'll hear from Chris Sale, who was able to throw a live batting practice session at Truist Park this week, how he felt about that, and how he feels about getting back on the mound here in 2025. Don't go anywhere. This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Live from the Kia Studios in Midtown, discussing what was a very profitable weekend for a Braves club that, at least coming into this 5-game series against the Marlins, it didn't exactly feel like you could expect 4 out of 5 in terms of the win column because they'd just gotten swept by the Milwaukee Brewers. But the Braves able to reverse their fortunes, play some very good baseball, get some big hits, have some rallies. They pitched well. I mean, it kind of looked like you wanted it to look all year for the Braves, and I can't even begin to tell you better late than never because there is a little bit of a chunk of the season left. But when you're staring at the hole that the Braves have dug themselves, obviously it's hard to find too much optimism around where they are in terms of the bigger picture stuff they wanted to accomplish this season. But there are some things that can still be done in 2025 that can set them up for 2026. And one of those I've talked about quite a bit is getting some of the players who are currently on the IL back if the situation avails itself, if that player is healthy and ready to contribute. And we saw a little bit of that this weekend. I talked about Ronald Acuña Jr. taking batting practice, doing some running. But on the mound, and for a unit that needs all the help it can get, that starting rotation would love to have Chris Sale back. You've got, right now, Spencer Strider. You've got what we saw from Joey Wentz on Sunday, which has been pretty good. We got what we saw from Hurston Waldrep. So a little bit of the past, the present, and the future all needing to come together, basically. If you get the reigning Cy Young Award winner back and put him at the top of that heap, it, I think, gives you a little bit more confidence about what you're doing. It should help the bullpen out. There's a trickle-down effect, maybe build a little bit of confidence moving through what is, I'm sure, a season that has eaten at the confidence of the Atlanta Braves. But Chris Sale able to throw 30 pitches on Thursday at Truist Park. Remember, he has been out since late June with the 2 cracked ribs that was suffered on a diving play, trying to close out a complete game shutout against the New York Mets. I mean, and it was right in the middle of that series where you thought, is this the time? Is this the moment where the 2025 Braves finally say enough is enough, and we're going to sweep these guys? We're going to go on a winning streak. We're going to get back above 500. We're going to get ourselves to the trade deadline. We're going to do some – no, it was not that, unfortunately. And I think that the Chris Sale injury just was that one more thing. Like, enough stuff has gone wrong this year. You just could have done without that. And he's not the only one. Let me say that. But 30 pitches, pain-free, looked very comfortable, free and easy. He had thrown 3 bullpen sessions prior to this and had been doing a long toss program really since right around the All-Star game. So Chris Sale had worked his way up to this, and we found out that he's going to get a rehab start with AAA Gwinnett, which is going to happen on Tuesday. But let's hear from Chris Sale, who discussed what the healing process was like from those 2 cracked ribs that he suffered on that diving play.
So I would say it was pretty stagnant for a couple weeks. First couple weeks just kind of felt like it was never going to get better. I want to say I hit like the 3-week mark, and I really was like, it was the first time I really noticed, like, okay, like it's kind of starting to get better. I got to 4 weeks and was basically fine. So that's kind of when we started playing catch, was at the 4-week mark. And, ever since then it was, every day was just kind of got, a little bit better. And now, I'm playing catch. I've played catch to 150 feet, played long toss, throwing all my pitches, got off the mound, 3 times before today. So, I was confident moving forward kind of after that 4-week mark.
So good to hear that for Chris Sale. I mean, clearly there was just a lot of unknown around this. Yeah, it wasn't an arm injury. It was another one of those freak things, and he's dealt with a lot of those in his career. He's had some major injuries, and he's had some really, really weird ones as well. But when it comes down to it, I think a lot of people were wondering, all right, well, knowing the injury history, why is he out there diving and trying to make plays? And I think there's a very simple answer to that, and I really loved what Chris Sale had to say about that. With the benefit of hindsight, yeah, he probably would have avoided diving to break his ribs, but you got to appreciate the competitor that is Chris Sale. Let's take a listen to that.
Yeah, it was the 6th and the 7th ribs, and they were, just cracked them on that diving play. So it happens when pitchers try to be athletes. I think next time I might just let Ozzie get that one. So, but again, it's one of those things. This is Major League Baseball. This is the big leagues, and I've been taught to get outs any way you possibly can, and just kind of sucks, given what happened and how long it had to take, but a little bit easier pill to swallow knowing it, it wasn't an arm injury and was, kind of a freak thing, kind of on one of those kind of hustle plays. So, I didn't have too many nights staring at my ceiling at 3 a.m. because of it, but, still sucks.
And there's an operative statement right there. Yes, it did suck. I can also confirm that. But you think these guys don't go home and think about like what they're not able to do on the field and why and how long they're going to be out? I promise. I mean, everybody's got a misery index of how much this stuff affects them. And for Chris Sale not being able to go out there and make his turn in rotation every single time, it eats him up because he's a competitor and he cares. So let me segue that right into the last thing that Chris Sale talked about that I thought was of interest here after his bullpen session on Thursday. And that was the question, why do you want to pitch again? I mean, look at the season. Look what's not happened. Look what's gone wrong for the Braves. Why is it important to you? This is what Chris Sale had to say.
I don't care what the record says. I like to compete, and I want to go out there and do my job. I've missed enough baseball in my career that, this isn't something that I just, I'm okay with being done, right? And I think it's important to finish a year, not on the IL and be able to at least hang my hat on the fact that, okay, like I was able to finish the year pitching and upright going into the offseason knowing that there's no, real questions or concerns or anything that I'm going to have to, I guess you could say take care of. And I think it's important for next year. I think, if I end the year, I mean, how many innings am I? I'm up like mid-80s or something like that. And it's going to be hard to push towards, that 200 inning mark next year. So, I think being able to get some innings under my belt this year is going to protect me for next year, being able to kind of get as many innings as I possibly can for next year.
And I think that kind of thing is important. And obviously Chris Sale, who's thrown way more innings in the big leagues than I have, he believes in the building up process. And again, I've talked to a lot of different people who are like, well, you shut them down, for their own good and for their own protection and because this year doesn't mean anything. And in addition to the message that it sends everybody else that you're asking to go out there and play anyway, it's a difficult pill to swallow, to use his exact verbiage there, if you were just told, just stop competing. I just don't think that's a switch that you're going to find with a guy like Chris Sale. Now, I'm also not saying, hey, are you hurt? Well, just play through that and don't say anything. Clearly not. That's not responsible either. But I think we're trying to thread the needle properly. And with that, there's an importance to being able to finish what you started for Chris Sale, because the longer he goes without pitching competitive innings, you're not just able to delay the inevitable of a possible injury for every player by just having them sit out a little bit longer. Because when they do come back, whether that's spring training, April, May, June, July, whatever the case is, August, September, the off season, stuff happens. It's going to happen if it's going to happen. I just don't think that you're taking a bigger risk by asking the guy who is capable of doing what he does to go out there and do it if he's healthy. And I think that that's kind of part of the point there. But the building up process, I believe that's extremely real, because you want your body to be ready for that workload. And starting pitchers, if you haven't guessed by now, are creatures of habit. They like to have things going on a schedule and not pitching for the final 3+ months of the year, then going into the offseason, then coming back in spring training and having to go through the whole, all right, well, man, this is really the first time since June. Chris Sale doesn't want that feeling in an exhibition start. He doesn't want that feeling on opening day or any start after that. So just a couple of other things to think about. And that kind of brings me to the other side of this coin, I feel like. Was there some conversation about, all right, well, which players on the roster can you comfortably shut down for the year, since the year no longer matters in the eyes of the outside, world? And maybe that's a harsh way to say it. But look, you're 16 games under 500 in the middle of August. Obviously, that's not where you want to be, but you have to play out the string at this point, if nothing else. And the Spencer Strider conversation. But I think these innings right now are every bit as important for Spencer Strider, and for the exact reasons that Chris Sale is talking about, because Spencer missed an entire year. Came back, then had to go back on the IL, then come back off again, work his way through all of that, and he got on a very nice run. I know he got knocked around in his last start, but I did like the stuff. I felt like the stuff is still there. And I think maybe he's kind of at that point at like the 15-ish start, marker, if you will, that maybe he's hitting a wall a little bit, but it's kind of something that you have to push through and continue to push through. And you're the better for it on the other side if you're able to complete those innings, build up that workload, get into the winter and say, okay, that was hard, that was challenging, that was difficult, I had to do this, and this, but I made it. And now when I get in February, I am going to feel more confident for what I was able to at least build up to this point. It's a constant process of building, especially for starting pitchers. And again, trying to manage away from injuries. I'm not telling you that, hey, if it's sore, if it doesn't feel good, if it's uncomfortable, that, just throw through it anyway. Who cares? Go be a competitor. But I do think that there's a line there, and it's a line that the Braves are trying to walk. It's a line I think every player tries to walk as well. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. An example of it not working, Joe Jimenez. Last year, Joe pitched through a knee injury that I've heard Brian Snitker say multiple times. Like, I don't know how he did that when they went in to clean it up and found out exactly how much cartilage damage was in there. And all Jimenez did was throw the most games he'd ever thrown with the lowest ERA, basically have his best season. And he did all of that, essentially, with a bum leg. Well, after getting that surgery, the Braves announced he's going to miss 8 to 12 months, getting that all cleaned up, so he may not pitch this year. They certainly couldn't plan on him pitching. Now, if you're the skeptic out there that says, well, if they knew he wasn't going to pitch this year, why didn't they get more bullpen help? That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that. I think in hindsight, you probably would have liked to have done that, but one more reliever probably wasn't going to stem the tide of what's happened to the Atlanta Braves this year. But Jimenez had done all of his rehab, done all of his throwing, got down to Florida where he was really going to ramp up, try to get back on the mound, and unfortunately for him, started dealing with discomfort in that knee, and the Braves have shut Joe Jimenez down from throwing. Given the timetable and what you've got, if you want to make a case for there's no reason to push Joe Jimenez through the rehab that's dating back all the way to November of last year, I would co-sign on that. I believe that probably is prudent. If Joe's able to pick up a baseball and do some things, maybe get himself into a little bit of a rehab assignment, maybe that's worthwhile for him to have some innings under his belt. But for the most part, I kind of feel like this is probably going to be a wrap for Joe Jimenez trying to get back before the end of the season, which I know was a goal of his. So discretion is important, and it's a case-by-case basis. You can't just start shutting guys down to shut them down just because. And that goes for Chris Sale, for Spencer Strider, for Ronald Acuña Jr. I mean, Austin Riley, we'll see what the case is for him. I know he's been through this abdominal thing a couple of times. We'll get into it a little bit more later. But everybody's going through something, man. Nobody's 100% from opening day on, probably the first day of spring training on. You're going to be sore. You're going to be tired. You're going to have aches. You're going to have pains. There is a difference, obviously, between being hurt and being injured, between being sore and being hurt. But trying to figure all that out in the midst of a season that does have the context of not being what you want. And I brought this up, and I'm going to bring it up again because I do think it's a good point. If you start quitting on the players, how would you feel if the players start looking at it and saying, you know what? I just don't know if I really want to push my rehab right now and come back because this season doesn't look good. It's really not worth me coming back. And I'll give you a name, Anthony Rendon. You want a team full of Anthony Rendones? I'm not saying they're all going to get $300 million or whatever you got, but if you want to start going down that rabbit hole, it can go south really fast. And I've yet to find anybody who said, you know what I really love is when the players quit on a season. Or a teammate who says, you know what I really love is when my teammate quits on me. It's just seeds you don't want to sow. You don't want to reap them, I promise, but you certainly don't want to start letting them grow unchecked and unfettered in your clubhouse. So those are a few thoughts from me. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk on injuries. I appreciate it. I'll be back again next Sunday, maybe with something better to talk about. I don't know. But unfortunate news for Joe Jimenez. Good news, though, for Chris Sale. Again, the rehab start for him. He'll be with the Gwinnett Stripers on Tuesday. If that goes well, he threw 30 pitches in his side session, his live BP. So I would imagine maybe you want to get Chris up to the 60-ish pitch mark, maybe a little bit more, and then kind of see. He could throw another bullpen after that. The Braves don't have to activate him when first available. They could kind of time this thing out. He does have a rehab assignment window, of course, of I believe it's 3 weeks-ish at least. It's multiple weeks anyway. If you needed him to make multiple starts, he could, is my point. And the Braves can sort all of that out as it goes. But that's kind of where the Braves are on the injury front. Obviously, we know where they are in the overall scope of the season, but I do think there are still things to be accomplished for this Atlanta Braves club in 2025 that can set them up for 2026. When we come back, though, we are going to go to the other side of the coin for the weekend that was. It was the Miami Marlins in town. They've been playing some really good baseball. Not so great at Truist Park, but what's ahead for the Miami Marlins? I'll ask Craig Mish of FanDuel Sports Florida to fill us in on what changed down in Miami for the Marlins, who were surging in the standings and in the wild card hunt for the first time in a while. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Here we go now.
I love baseball.
Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We are live from the Kia Studios, closing out the weekend for the Atlanta Braves, who just wrapped up a 5-game series with the Miami Marlins, a club that came in on a serious roll. And perhaps over the next month and a half, the Marlins will get on a roll again. But either way, wanted to talk about what has made this Marlins club a surprise entrant into the wildcard picture in the National League for the final month and a half. To help me do that, I want to welcome in Craig Mish. You can catch him on Sports Grid, and you can also see him on the FanDuel Sports Network down in Florida. Well, Craig, it's always great to catch up with you. I know we like to at least chat about the National League East and what's going on for the Braves and for the Marlins over the course of a season, but I don't know if we really had 2025 all mapped out when we were talking back in April. Obviously, some things have gone wrong for the Braves. I've talked about that enough on the show, but I wanted you to come on to talk about what's going right for the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Grant. It's been such an improvement over last year. I mean, we can start there. At the end of last year, the Marlins were just constantly shuttling through players, calling guys up and down. The bullpen just didn't resemble anything like a big league staff. And this year it's been a complete change, and that's probably a good place to start. Their bullpen has been super effective over the last couple of months, and so is their starting pitching. Virtually every starting pitcher is getting now deeper into games. They've been a healthy team, unlike the Braves, and I think that some of those things have shined. And then the other part of it, Grant, is that, when was the last time we've seen offensive players the Marlins acquired come through their system and perform almost immediately? That has just been a rare occasion, and they have 3 right now, 3 players in the lineup in Kyle Stowers and Augustin Ramirez, and now this kid Jacob Marcy, who have performed at a high level. So definitely headed in the right direction, regardless of what the last month and a half looks like.
Yeah, you brought up some names that I definitely want to get into as we chat here. And in the National League, just at large, just so people are understanding exactly how good things are going in Miami, we just got a firsthand look at the Milwaukee Brewers. They've been the hottest club in baseball. The only team I think that's been hotter in the National League than the Marlins have been. And that has helped the Marlins climb into the wild card race, the good work that they've done over this past 6-7 weeks. They have run into a speed bump of sorts this weekend, but only 6 games back in the wild card with 45 to go. Craig, if I told you that on opening day, I think anybody associated with the Marlins is signing up for that with no questions asked.
Oh, there's no doubt that they would take that. And now, Marlins fans are a little, opportunistic, feeling like they need to win every game at this point. And a lot of complaining I see going on too. But the Marlins have won like every series pretty much since the beginning of June or into June. And it just kind of feels like at this point in the season, you can't win every single game, as they say, and sweeping the Yankees. And it feels like maybe it's going a little bit in the other direction, and maybe some normalcy is kicking back in. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm with you, Grant. I mean, for them to, chase that win total down, I believe they had that number at around 66. They're going to fly over that this year.
No question about that. Chatting with Craig Mish, who covers the Miami Marlins. He joins me on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game via the WadeFord.com hotline. Let me throw some numbers at you because I think there's some pretty good ones, and I'm sure the Marlins are very happy to see these. Since June the 22nd, this is a club that is 27-15. That's 6th in Major League Baseball in runs scored, helping to fuel that attack, 2nd in the National League, and top 10 in Major League Baseball in ERA, 4th in the National League. Let me kind of ask you this. As someone who watched the team get off to a 30-45 start, how surprised are you by what's happening here insofar as both sides seem to have really clicked? The lineup has, and the pitching staff as well, and we know when that happens, obviously, the winning's going to follow.
Yes, it's not surprising. It's shocking. I don't think I ever could have projected this to happen, and especially in a season where their Cy Young Award winner coming back has an ERA over 6 in Sandy Alcantara. But it just goes to show baseball's a funny sport. Now, have they been a little bit on the lucky side? I think that's fair to say. Like, as an example, the Braves have a better run differential than the Marlins, and the Marlins are well ahead of the Braves in the standings. But I mean, look, they've definitely gotten the pitching, and Yuri Perez is back to being who he was. But if you're looking for specific things that are maybe the most surprising of the season, I think it probably starts with Kyle Stowers, who they acquired in the trade with the Baltimore Orioles, because at the end of the season, I don't think people would have been stunned to see him hit, 260, 270 with 10, 15 home runs, maybe 20. But he's in the top 10, and as far as voting is concerned, and in terms of WAR, he's right up there. He's got a chance to be, certainly getting votes for the MVP, maybe not to win, but within that top 10 range. So, Grant, he has carried them at different points of the season. So to me, that is the stunning development for them this year.
Let me draw a parallel here, and obviously we don't know how things are going to play out, but there are a couple of things you said there that I think ring very familiar to what the Braves were doing in 2021. Now, clearly the Braves had done a little winning prior to 2021, but they could not seem to get off the deck, get over 500, get their season rolling that year. They lost Ronald Acuña Jr., something that you guys saw firsthand down in Miami, and the questions really became about this club. All right, well, now what? Now, obviously, there were a lot of other narrative things, including trading for an entire new outfield and all of those things, but let me circle you've got to be lucky. There has to be some luck that comes into it. The Braves in 2021, I would not say that was their best constructed or most successful regular season team, but the thing about it was they were able to do the things they needed to, and the ball did bounce their way some. They put themselves in position to have that good fortune carry them, and that, I think, can be baked into, to go back to this wild card thing and the hunt that the Marlins are in right now, it can go right if you get hot at the right time. So this opportunity that they have in this next 6 or 7 weeks, it's just got to be tantalizing for this club.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. And not only that, but the Braves at that time acquired Soler, and they acquired Adam Duvall, and they were, healthy from that point of the season till the end. And I think the Braves have been very much on the unlucky side. I know the fans don't want to hear that, but it is 2 years in a row with them having significant injuries to the rotation, missing Acuña for the majority of the season. So look, so many things factor into a season from beginning to end. Miami has been exceptionally healthy in my mind this season. Yes, they've got a couple of starters who were down in Max Meyer and Ryan Weathers, But Grant, you could say that. I'm guessing about 27 teams in baseball have 3, 4, 5 starters down. That is a big part of where the Marlins are at. Now, is that a skill? Is it something that they've developed to keep their guys healthier with some of this increased competition that they're having when they're not playing? Maybe. I don't know the answer to that. I guess we'll find out more about that when the data comes out after next year's season, because anything can happen over the course of 1 year. But yes, a lot of factors play into it. But Miami is building for the future right now, and they've taken a bigger step than they thought. There's no doubt.
Yeah, no question about that. Chatting with Craig Mish here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as we cover the Marlins surge here in the second half, really before the second half even began, as they have been climbing in the standings. National League East may be a little bit further out of reach, but the wild card, it's right out there in front of the Marlins, who are 6 back coming into Sunday with 45 games to play. One other, if you'll allow, for the 2021 Braves to the 2025 Marlins to go back to Kyle Stowers. There always needs to be, I think, somebody in there that's kind of that carrying that driving force. Yes, I know, the Braves had Freddie Freeman. I'm going to put him off to the side. But in 2021, it was the emergence, I feel, of Austin Riley who really became a driver for this team. So with Kyle Stowers, who may have come into 2025 with limited expectations as to what he could be, the fact that he has done what he's done in this, 47-game run up to here, 15 homers, 37 runs knocked in, make that the last 41 games that he's played with an OPS just under 1,100. I feel like in some part, if you'll allow for this, that Kyle Stowers is kind of playing that Austin Riley 2021 role for the Marlins.
Yeah, he is, but what's kind of stunning is that I'm guessing, Grant, that your listeners are like, what is this guy talking about? Stowers has done absolutely nothing this weekend in the 4 games that they've played, and guess what? Miami is 1-3, so that does tell you the story a little bit. And look, that takes nothing away from Augustin Ramirez, who is going to either finish as second in the Rookie of the Year voting to Drake Baldwin, or maybe he'll win it. We'll see. It's still some time to play on that. But he has been, one player that kind of, as he goes, the team seems to go, and he's gone cold this weekend in Atlanta. Good for the Braves, bad for the Marlins, because as it stands right now, yes, they are 6 games back, Grant, but they are chasing several teams to jump into that final wild card spot. Maybe things would have been different had they gone 3-1 against the Braves this week with the way the Mets have been losing. We could be talking about a serious run, but as I checked on FanGraphs, I believe the Marlins' chances, their odds to win the playoffs are under 1% now. So it kind of tells you how things have gone sour a little this week.
Yeah, and that can swing wildly just based on a good week, a bad week, maybe a couple of good weeks in a row can really change your fortunes, and the Marlins have certainly been able to win in a sustained rate. It wasn't like they just got hot for 2 or 3 series. They've been on this run for a while, and you're going to lose a series every once in a while, though. That is kind of part of a long season. Let me ask you about a couple of other hitters. You mentioned Ramirez, who has been a very impressive rookie this year. I was looking at Xavier Edwards and what he's been able to do during this run. It seems like he's been able to put some things together this year as well. It may not be a lineup of familiar names, to your point earlier, but there are some young hitters that do seem to be kind of finding themselves at the big league level and finding themselves, maybe putting it lightly for a guy like Stowers, but some other guys are taking some really important steps.
Yeah, and Miami's very big on run prevention, and so earlier in the season, what they did is they swapped their, Edwards, who you mentioned, from short to second, and they moved Otto Lopez from second to short. Lopez's numbers have pretty much been where you thought they would be, but Edwards' numbers have gone just through the roof, Grant, since that move, and I think that it looks like maybe he was just putting too much mental pressure on himself having to play shortstop every day. But, the comparisons is kind of interesting. The comparisons that people make with Edwards is kind of like the guy who they had previously in Luis Arias, who, basically would just, get a lot of hits, hit at a high average. But I would tell you that Edwards' defense is better than Arias, and he also steals bases too. So Miami just plugged him in from where Arias was, and I think they ended up doing just fine there. And of course, he's under team control too as well. So, yes, he's a good story among all other stories. And if you look back at his numbers in April, and I think even into May, Grant, since then, he's been probably one of the better second basemen in all of baseball.
Yeah, he definitely has been. Just looking on FanGraphs, you do find his name among the better players in baseball over the past 6 or 7 weeks. Top 20, top 25 hitter, plus the defense. You'll certainly take that if you're Miami. Let's switch over to the other side. The pitching is clearly a part of what's going so well for the Miami Marlins here to get them up towards 500 and into this wild card race. Obviously, Sandy Alcantara brings the name recognition. You can watch him pitch, and the stuff is still there. The results, I think have been obviously in question, but it looks like guys like Edward Cabrera and Yuri Perez and others have seemed to really take a step forward to kind of be the driving force of this rotation. So, I mean, if Sandy Alcantara figures it out, I mean, this thing could get really scary really fast.
Yeah, and he's, unfortunately, he's having the worst year of his career, and everybody else around him seems to be performing at a pretty high level, and they do have some reinforcements in the minors I think that we'll see soon. Edward Cabrera, as you just mentioned, has really been the story of the year. He's kind of taken over as the Marlins ace. Saw how well he pitched the other day. What's really funny, Grant, is you hear a lot of Marlins fans, I do hear a lot of Marlins fans say, well, can you imagine if Sandy Alcantara was the Sandy Alcantara of old, where would the Marlins be? And my answer is, well, can you imagine if Edward Cabrera was the Edward Cabrera of old? Where would the Marlins be? I mean, I think people don't understand there's give and take in baseball. It's really unpredictable. And so, I tend to not go with that stuff. And I just say every year is different. Next year, Sandy could be great, and Edward Cabrera could take a step back. But the stabilizer, I think, of all, as you just mentioned, the other name is Yuri Perez. And look, there's Paul Skeens and Mizorowski and honestly, Smith Shawver was having a great year too before he got hurt. But, Yuri Perez is among a very, very short list of best young pitchers in baseball. I don't know if it's top 5 or top 10 or even top 3, but look, Skeens comes to mind and some others, but he is right there with all of them.
Yeah, and players like that doing the things like you've seen Yuri Perez be able to do this year, that's all part of this bigger story as well. And if he's able to do this now, just kind of projecting what the future looks like, becomes a lot easier to do if you're a Miami Marlins fan or a member of the Miami Marlins front office under Peter Bendix. Your bullpen for Miami has also been extremely good on this incredible run that the Marlins have had going over the past month and a half or so. An ERA just over 3, one of the best in baseball. What's going right in the bullpen, and who stepped up there?
Yeah, they have basically deployed several players in several different situations throughout the game. They don't have a true closer, a true 8th inning, 7th inning. And there's a couple of names that I think fans would recognize, but generally speaking, these were players cut, DFA'd, scrap heap type players that have been amazing. And bullpens are another thing, Grant, year to year, you never know. So we could come back here next year and have this conversation, and all these guys who are doing well may not be, but the organization does have them throwing quite a bit of sliders and sweepers, a lot of spin. That's a big part of it. But they found this kid Ronnie Enriquez, essentially from nowhere. He was just let go. They picked him up in February. He's been fantastic. Tyler Phillips is another pitcher who they got, again, a cut player or traded for nothing player from the Philadelphia Phillies. And the list goes on and on. They have Anthony Bender. They have 4 or 5 guys who can get outs at any time. We've seen that slip a little bit over the last couple of days, but ironically, it doesn't seem like Clayton McCullers wanted to go to some of these big leverage guys against the Braves this series. I'm not really sure why that has been, but over the course of the last 2 months, they've been absolutely fantastic. But I always caution people, like I just said, with bullpens. You don't know. Next year you could come in and everyone's blaming the bullpen for the season, but they've been it's a credit to the organization for finding these players and developing them in the way that they like them to pitch.
Well, let me just second your point there, because the Braves have had a lot of things go wrong this year, but over this last month and a half, I'd say the bullpen is probably the group that's had to wear it the most. Well, Craig, I appreciate all of your time as always. Looks like it could be an intriguing stretch drive for the Marlins, and I look forward to catching up with you again before the season comes to a close.
Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9, The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as we wrap up the weekend. Braves and Marlins done with their 5-game series. Atlanta's journey through the National League East, though, continues this week as they will play 3 against the New York Mets coming up beginning on Monday. Now, that may be what's coming up, but I would like to turn back the clock to this week in Braves history 35 years ago. If you grew up on the Atlanta Braves in the 1980s, then you knew one player was synonymous with this team, and his name was Dale Murphy. But it was August 3rd, 1990, when the Braves traded the man who was their franchise player to the Philadelphia Phillies, and at the time, that was a pretty tough pill to swallow. A few years ago, Murph was nice enough to sit down with me and tell me the entire story of that trade, everything that led up to it and everything that came after, going from the Braves to the Phillies and ultimately a stop with the Colorado Rockies before his career was over. Being as it is the 35th anniversary of a rather notable trade in Braves history, I wanted to share at least part of my conversation with Dale Murphy with you right here, right now on From the Diamond.
I always appreciate the chance to talk about it. It was an interesting time in my family, my career, and the whole Braves organization, and it's always a welcome opportunity for me to discuss a little bit more of it, kind of behind-the-scenes ideas and what I was thinking, and just a few more of the details.
If you can, tell me a little bit about what was happening at the time, back in 1990, and how you were feeling about what maybe you needed at that time in your career.
Yeah, and thank you again, Grant, for the chance to talk about it once more. Let me think here. Where should I start? I think there were some trade rumors. I think this is kind of probably where the seed was planted in my mind. Trade rumors, 86, 87, 88. I think 87 I had a good year. 88 wasn't so good, and 89 wasn't so good, and the team wasn't doing so good. So some of the trade rumors kind of slowed up. And I think what Nancy and I were talking about during this time was we've just noticed, and you can look at the history of baseball in all organizations, the same thing happens, except for a very few players. Tony Gwynn, Chipper Jones, Derek Jeter, and I'm sure there's some others that I can't think of right now. Cal Ripken, I guess, is another one, where the player actually stays with the organization that he started with. It seems that there comes a time in a player's career where the organization wants to go a different way. They don't know what to do necessarily. The best way I could describe it, gets kind of sticky.
Sure.
The player still, he's got all those ties to that organization. Maybe his production has slipped a little bit, and you could just go through the list. And I personally, saw what happened to Phil Niekro, what happened to Nuxie. Nuxie, and I think that was in our minds that, something's going to happen eventually. Someone's going to have to make a decision. And I think that's what was going through our mind at the time, is it time to move on? I guess that was the question. So my situation was being at least a 10-year veteran with at least 5 years with the same team.
Yeah.
You have the opportunity to, veto trades, and you kind of still have some control. So I came to 1990 and had struggled. I hadn't really had a couple of good years put together, and it came to 1990, and I think what went through my mind is I'm going to make a decision. And so I had to make a decision, I think, during the season. Well, at least I wanted to make, I was trying to think about it. And Nancy and I decided we were going to move. We were going to, go out and be a free agent. And I hadn't done it before. I'd been happy with Atlanta and signed some multi-year contracts, kind of had faith that we were, going to, make some good progress. And so that was it, basically. I went into Bobby Cox's office, and he was, as I recall, GM and the manager at the time. And I think we were on the road somewhere, and I said, Bobby, I got to talk to you. And he said, yeah, what's up? And I said, I'm going to be a free agent next year. And he said, yeah, I know that. I said, no, I'm going to leave. I'm going to be a free agent. I'm going to go out. Nancy and I decided that it's time for me to move on. They said, but if there's a trade that you guys can explore now, I'd be happy to consider it. So that's where it got to the point, Grant. I made that decision. And so the Braves started looking at trades, possible trades.
There's a lot to unpack there, obviously, and a lot I want to kind of delve into.
Let's go back and review that.
Like, as a player, what is it like to hear your name in trade rumors? Because for fans, it may be one of their favorite parts of the game is having these discussions, but it has to feel a lot different when it's your name that's the thing being discussed.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I had never had that happen before, ever, as a player coming up with the Braves. I've never experienced anything but the Braves organization. Then all of a sudden, not a lot of them, really. The most frequent one I heard was with the Mets. I'm sure there was some other discussions, but that was the Mets. And I ran into Jack McKeon, a number of times over the years, and he was with San Diego, and he keeps telling me he was begging Ray Kroc, his wife, I can't remember her, I think it was Joan Kroc, who started McDonald's and all that, or at least, anyway, owned the San Diego Padres, and he told me he went in to talk to her numerous times about trading for me. And I've always liked Jack. A lot of people don't realize that I played for him in AAA for a couple months.
Wow.
Back in 77. He was the manager of the Richmond Braves, and I got called up.
Small world.
Yeah, it was a great guy. Everybody loved to play for him. And, of course, we know what he did. He went down to Miami. He's a great baseball guy. So, anyway, your question was, what's it like? It's really weird. But I'll tell you, the reason why it got these kind of thoughts going is when I considered the possibility, and Nancy and I thought about, having, 8-9 years in the league, and we started thinking about what it would be like in New York, and it picked us up a little bit because I was kind of in the doldrums, best way to explain it, 88 and 89, and the team wasn't doing well, and it was just stagnant. And so the positive of getting your name mentioned is that sometimes it really gets your adrenaline going. You think, hey, this could be a good thing.
Yeah.
And I never talked to the Braves about it. So that's what it was like for me at that time. I was very interested in it.
Of course, let's just let people know. I mean, most folks that are listening to it at this point know that you were traded to the Phillies. Tommy Green was sent along a little bit later, but Jim Vatcher, Victor Rosario, and reliever Jeff Parrott, who had big league experience, were the three pieces that came back to Atlanta. As that deal was coming together, clearly that's something Bobby Cox would be working on. And you mentioned a little bit of this, but did you have input on the cities that you were interested in? Or at that point, as a 10-5 player, was it more about Bobby Cox trying to find a deal and then approaching you for approval of that deal?
Yeah, all of the above, right. So I had some control, even though it was a trade. The thought about the trade was that there was still some loyalty that we had with the Braves, and we thought that if there's a trade, then they can get something in return as opposed to me leaving. And so we thought, okay, well, that would be a nice thing. If there's a city that comes up and sounds interesting to us, at least they would get something in return for me as opposed to me leaving as a free agent. And the other thing is, if there was a city that I'd like to go play at, they would also have to extend my contract.
Right.
So the advantage to me was if the city's good, I'm going to have a contract extension instead of going through free agency. And remember, if I went into free agency, I was banking on a couple of years that weren't that good.
Yeah.
So my thought was, if this is a good situation and they're going to extend my contract, then it's a bonus for me. I got a good deal and a couple extra years on my contract at the current level of my salary. Instead of going out into free agency, the Braves would get nothing, and I would be at the mercy of my last couple of years. So Bobby came back to us and said, the Phillies are interested. And we said, well, what's the deal? And so Nancy and I just had to sit here and, do our best to figure out what, we're thinking, the Phillies kind of like New York. It could be a time in my career where I really needed that extra juice that comes from a Northeast city, knowing that it is different. Playing in Philadelphia, playing in New York, playing in Boston is different than playing in Atlanta, L.A., or San Diego.
Right.
And maybe it would be a good time in my career. It would be really motivating. And so we said yes. And I didn't really know the players involved, but the challenge for fans is to say, well, the Phillies didn't give, commensurate value. Well, they extended my contract, and the Braves had no leverage. So that's kind of why the trade, people are saying, oh, it wasn't, equal in value. Well, the Braves really didn't have any leverage, and they were trying to get something for me, which they wouldn't get if I'd not accepted it.
I think it's really interesting that you were able to tie all of those things together for folks and paint a full picture as opposed to, hey, Dale Murphy was the greatest player we've had, and I'm not thrilled with what we got back for him. I think that's a natural reaction, but there's so much more, so many more layers underneath the surface there.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, Grant. That is exactly it. I mean, I still, on social media, get people say, I'll never forgive the Braves for what happened. But when you look at, and I didn't read the papers that much and what I said. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what I said. But I know every time I've talked about the trade, I try to emphasize that I initiated it. Yeah. And it just still, from fans back then, I think they still do not. You're exactly right. It didn't have the information, didn't go into all that. And I haven't had a chance to, whenever I get the chance, like today, I like to explain that. I got extended probably at least 2 years. I can't remember. But I got a real nice contract extension at my age, which was really attractive. And getting back to the Braves organization, and I think this is a real key thing, I knew someone was going to have to make a decision. And there's a little bit of a false narrative out there that I moved on to make room for David Justice in right field. I knew David was there. I knew he's a real good player, but I was thinking more, you got to think about your family, your career. The one point, as Nancy said earlier, that I did think about the Braves is if I accept a trade, they can get some value back for it. If I go free agent, it's nothing. So it put a lot of pressure on the Braves. They have taken the fall for that, and it's clearly, unfair because we initiated it. Bobby was doing the best he could, and, it would have taken a lot of heat off of them if I'd have just been a free agent.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been Murphy's leaving, and that's fine, but I don't know. It's really interesting to try to unfold the psychology and exactly what I was thinking, but that's my best shot right there, is that it was time for me to move. And the best way to put it. And so I don't know how many teams Bobby talked to. The thought of playing in Philly was just so different that it was really motivating. And I knew they had a good nucleus. I mean, you got to remember, this is 90. Mm-hmm. I went there in August. I played 91. It was so-so year. 92, I felt really good, Grant. And then I got hurt. I had staph infection. Actually, long story, very short, is I've talked to doctors now. They're pretty sure I had MRSA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which wasn't really, we didn't have that acronym back then. But I missed most of 92. My point is, 93, they went to the World Series. I mean, I kind of felt that this was a good organization. I always liked Mike Schmidt. Of course, he was retired in 89, I think. Mm-hmm. And I got a little anecdote about Mike, too. I walked in to the clubhouse, and, of course, he was retired, but he walked in, and he goes, man, it is really weird to see you in that uniform.
Yeah.
But, he came up to me and he said, I've always wondered during my whole career what it would be like to play in another city. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, that Hall of Famer and the ups and downs he had in Philly, he always in the back of his mind wondered what it would be like. And I had that experience, and it was a great experience. I really did. And unfortunately, there's a lot of baggage to it that the Braves, I kind of forced the Braves' hand, and when you look at it, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm sure there's some other things to describe, except that I will say that it was very emotional and harder for Nancy and I than we thought it would be to leave Atlanta. I mean, there were tears and a lot of memories. I mean, I wouldn't have had a career without the Braves. I'll always be a Brave, but look at Glav. Glav moved on, went to another city, Smoltzy. Everybody usually does. So that's my story on how I got to another city. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I love playing in Philly.
Well, I was going to ask, I think you just kind of touched on it, how difficult was it at the end of the day to leave Atlanta, which was that place where you launched your career, you enjoyed your success, and a place that you built quite a legacy with Braves fans, one that has survived, if not thrived, all the way through to right here today as we sit here talking.
Yeah, it was tough. I can't remember where I flew in from, but I think my car was parked at the stadium, Fulton County Stadium. Well, obviously, yeah, it was there. And I landed from wherever, midnight, 1 or 2, or came from the airport and took a cab to Fulton County Stadium to get my car and then drive home and try to figure out, when we were going to go to Philly. I walked out on the field. I actually went out on the field. That they were, a lot of times at night, stadiums are doing a lot of work on the field and the lights were on and no one was there. And I went out there and, had a good cry. It was a sad situation. I mean, it was a weird bundle of emotions. It really was weird.
I appreciate all the time that you've made for this, walking through the trade to the Phillies, of course, some of the other things that went on around that time in your career that maybe a lot of people don't know. So I'm really glad that you were so accommodating, number one, and number two, I know you mentioned this earlier, just getting a chance to kind of tell the whole story and let people know what exactly was going on at that time back in August of 1990, which for many people was a day that was pretty tough to live with. But for you, the person who actually lived it, there was a whole bunch of other things going on that I think it's interesting to give people that whole story. So thank you so much for making the time and for doing that.
Well, I appreciate it, Grant. I always appreciate the chance to talk about it because it was a confusing time. I think not all the information gets out. Even it may be out there, but it only got out in papers. And the main thing I want people to know is that I love the Atlanta Brave organization. I feel like I am an Atlanta Brave. You know, I wouldn't have had a career without them. And this was something that I initiated, I think, is the main thing. So I hope people, understand that. But that's what's great about sports, isn't it? We have our passions and we love our teams. But thank you, Grant.
Thank you so much, Murph. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Grant.
That was Braves great Dale Murphy talking about what led up to his trade to the Philadelphia Phillies and just how exactly that process played out for not just Murph, but the Murphy family as well, and how he views his legacy as an Atlanta Brave. There's a lot more to this conversation, nearly 40 minutes, in fact, and I'll make sure to share some links to that on social media, but just a really interesting walk down memory lane with Dale Murphy 35 years after he was traded to the Philadelphia Phillies. When we come back, we've got more Atlanta Braves and Major League Baseball talk to get to, and we'll do it next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball.
Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios, wrapping up the weekend, wrapping up this edition of the show as well, and able to have some really good conversations there. Hope you enjoyed those. Craig Mish, of course, talking about the Miami Marlins, who may have had a bad weekend stay here in Atlanta, losing 4 out of 5, but a club that's still just 6 games out of the third wild card spot with a lot of time left. Now, they're going to have to climb over half a dozen teams, sure, but they've given themselves the opportunity to at least be in the hunt down the stretch, and I'm sure the Braves would have no problem switching places were that to be their opportunity or their fate. But that aside, I know we talked a lot about the trade deadline, obviously, last week, and it got me thinking as we got into the month of August, well, big trades in Braves history, and that's why I wanted to go to the archives. I don't have a ton in the archives that I would play over and over and over again, but that conversation I had with Dale Murphy about the trade, the lead up to asking for a trade, and ultimately, I think, and for a kid who grew up on the 1980s Braves, not really realizing, hey, I think Dale Murphy would ask for a trade, but it made a lot of sense, and you had to hear that side of it. And then there is a lot more to it. I will link this on social media about, how his health really failed him, particularly his knees, in those final couple of years in Philadelphia, and then ultimately in Colorado. He retired in 1993 with 398 career home runs, the 2 MVP awards, obviously one of the most prolific sluggers not named Mike Schmidt in the 1980s, and as you know, longtime listeners of the show, and if you're new here, hi, thanks for checking in. We believe Dale Murphy is a Hall of Famer, and hopefully that's a call that he is going to get because he was a great player and is an even greater person. So putting all that aside, some really good stuff right there. Always enjoy having those great baseball conversations on the show, but let's talk a little bit more about the Atlanta Braves here in 2025. There are some things, despite the record, that are worth monitoring. One of them is named Hurston Waldrep. I talked about him early in the show, and we've talked about him a lot over the past week or so. A surprise call-up because of the Speedway Classic rain delay suspension debacle that went on last weekend, and now he's back. And not just back as the extra man for the doubleheader, but brought back up, and I think we're going to see Hurston Waldrep get some run up here in the big leagues to help out a just absolutely battered rotation in terms of the injuries. And 5 2/3 innings of 1-run ball last time out. 6 innings of 1-run ball in Saturday's game. So stack them up. 2 really good outings for him. So the obvious question is, what's the difference between that first opportunity where he got shelled last year in his very brief time in the major leagues and what's been going on in 2025? Here's Hurston Waldrep.
You can say what you want. I felt like I belonged here last year. I feel like if they didn't want me here, they wouldn't have put me up here. So the results are not always how the game should, it's not always a determination of, who should be here and who shouldn't. So, we had the injury and, things happen. This game filters out who it needs here and who it doesn't. So having these 2 starts here this year, but just really everything that I've worked for this year is a completely different mindset. But it's one of where I know what I need to do. I know it has to happen. I understand how the business works, how baseball works. So it's not really like it didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid of the failure that I experienced. But it just allowed me a chance to grow and to, go in the office every day, do what I needed to do, and, just prepare.
It is good to hear that. And, hey, it is kind of a business-like approach, I think, that does build success at the big leagues. And you got to like the confidence. I mean, last year's results, yeah, the numbers may not tell you every single time, but they'll tell you a lot if you look at them. And unfortunately for him last year, I think maybe a little bit early, but it doesn't really matter what I think because he's making the most of his opportunity now, and that's more important. Let's hear a little bit more from him because when I talked to him in spring training, which is something you heard on the show way back in February, he talked about the mechanical changes, the things he needed to change to get himself to that next level in 2025. And one of those things was his leg kick. So after the 2 successful outings, Hurston Waldrep discussed what exactly went into making that mechanical change that helped unlock some results.
My biggest thing is just being as athletic as possible when I'm on the mound. Like, that's always been the base of my mechanics and everything that I do. So struggling earlier in the year, it's kind of all it boiled down to is just, how can we make this as athletic as possible? And so that's where we just changed the leg kick. We're like, this is going to allow me to, get the right rhythm, not have too much movement. And we can produce the same velocity, if not more, with a different leg kick. And the biggest thing has been command. Just commanding both sides of the plate with all pitches. And the payoff that we've seen from something like that has been awesome. I've loved it. So it's not really thinking about the leg kick. It's kind of like I would compare it to like a Luke Weaver type thing where just the front leg just kind of hangs there and, catch myself on my back foot and just stay controlled, keep everything under control as possible. So I don't really say let's cut down 50% of the leg kick. It's just let's not focus on making it so big. Let's just let it be natural and let everything happen a little more naturally.
Yeah, just the progression you need to make when it comes to mechanical changes. It's not about reinventing everything. Sometimes for a hitter, it's about changing where their hands are, where their stance is, where their setup is, how their load is. Same thing for pitchers. It's about finding the things that make you the most efficient that allow you to repeat, especially arm slot, and to repeat pretty much everything for the continuity that you need in order to tunnel pitches and really stay one step ahead of hitters, which is what keeps you in the big leagues from what I understand. That aside, now one thing that can definitely help you out is finding pitches that are efficient and effective. And the Hurston Waldrep sinker that we've been seeing, the improvements that he's made with his arsenal, well, it owes to a very particular time this year in which an outside observer, well, I don't guess he's outside, he was on the team at the time, but not necessarily the normal catcher for Hurston Waldrep, decided to kind of give some feedback. And that catcher was Sean Murphy, who was on a rehab assignment. He was catching Hurston Waldrep and said, let's look at this sinker and think about what it could do for you. And here's how that went down.
We were in the video room it was the day after the start. He called me in. He's like, hey, man, let's go over the start a little bit. Let's look over some things. He noticed some things with my four seam. He's like, hey, I think it'd be really easy for you to throw a sinker right here. And I agreed. I threw it in the bullpen 2 days later or whatever it was. He was still there on rehab, and I was supposed to throw it to him again that week, but it didn't happen. But, it was a lot of video, a lot of comparing myself to other guys who are in the, have the same arsenal and how it would play and work with both hands. But he was really helpful in the process and, kind of opened some doors for me to be able to go and do that and know that, from what he was seeing, that it would play really well. So
I think this also underscores the value of a player and the value of Sean Murphy, because I know a lot of folks could look, especially at the year he had last year, and think, well, offensively, it was a bust. Is he really worth it? So on and so forth. And sometimes in a tough season, maybe that's just a conversation that's unavoidable. But there are other areas of value that Sean Murphy brings, and how he handles the pitching staff, the feedback that he can give a pitcher, and the influence he can have on a young arm like Hurston Waldrep, who in his first couple of starts, admittedly, small sample size, but he looks like he belongs. He looks comfortable, and he looks like this arsenal is working for him. A 1.54 ERA across those first 2 outings. So very, very good stuff from Hurston Waldrep. Joey Wentz, meanwhile, another strong start for Atlanta. That happened on Sunday. And what a pleasant surprise, since being plucked basically off the scrap heap, which is how the Braves have tried to rebuild their rotation. Joey Wentz, Carlos Carrasco, Eric Fetty. I mean, these were not the names that we were expecting to see in July, August, September for the Atlanta Braves. And maybe we'll start to see Chris Sale back in the saddle, and you got Spencer Strider and some of these young guns that can be involved as well. But while he did give up 5 runs against Milwaukee last time out, I thought Wentz was a little bit unlucky in that he didn't look necessarily bad, but the Brewers, obviously a very good team, but 5 1/3 innings of 1-run ball against the Marlins on Sunday, that gives him a 2.83 ERA in 28 2/3 innings since rejoining the Braves. And a lot of what's made him successful is basically they looked at what he was doing in Pittsburgh early in the year and said, let's key in on that arsenal. Let's refine that arsenal. And it has led to some really, really good success for Joey Wentz here. One other pitching note and conversation that I wanted to have, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I thought just maybe a mention of it because, we've got into the Marcell Ozuna conversation a few times over the past week or so. And look, Marcell, it looks like he's finally getting back on track. A couple of home runs against Sandy Alcantara. Long ball, back on the menu for the Big Bear. He's got 8 homers in his last 21 games. It's really 8 homers in his last 15 starts if we want to get technical about it. He didn't go anywhere at the trade deadline. And neither did Raisel Iglesias. But in 2026, I'm genuinely curious if the Braves wouldn't want to broker a deal, a short-term arrangement, to have Raisel Iglesias back, and not because he needs to be the figurehead of the bullpen. Maybe he could close for you. Maybe you just want to have a multitude of high-leverage options and kind of see how that whole thing plays out. But he didn't go anywhere at the trade deadline. And I'm just starting to wonder if that short-term arrangement and a reunion with Iglesias for next year wouldn't be the worst thing. But it would need to be one of several things to address your bullpen, obviously, because the way he's pitched the last couple of months, bad outing every now and again, but the way he's pitched the last couple of months, I really feel like he's made a case to be at least considered over the course of the offseason when he will go into free agency. Of course, the Braves know all about that. So I don't know if the same can be said for Marcell Ozuna just based on the roster crunch, Drake Baldwin, Sean Murphy, and so on. It's just some of the many decisions that Alex Anthopoulos will have to make in the offseason and the many conversations beyond that they will have to get it done. Coming up for the Braves, it is an off day on Monday. Then it's 3 games at Citi Field against the New York Mets. And the Mets, I'm here to tell you, if you thought things were going pretty rough for the Braves at times this year, the Mets are once again going through it. They came into Sunday having lost 9 out of 10, were 6 games in a row, and all they got to do was match up with the Brewers, which the Braves know all about that. After the 3 with the Mets next weekend, it will be 3 in Cleveland to face the Guardians and back home, 3 against the White Sox, and 3 more against the New York Mets. So a lot of Braves and Mets matchups are ahead of us, and that is what's going on for the Atlanta Braves in the not-too-distant future. But off on Monday, back in action at Citi Field against New York on Tuesday. I want to thank Craig Mish for making some time for me to talk about the Miami Marlins. My thanks, as always, to Dale Murphy. I like to call him a friend of the show, for that trip down memory lane from the archives here on From the Diamond as well. I'd like to thank my producer, Dom, for all the great work. As always, appreciate that. And every one of you who made From the Diamond part of your Sunday. I appreciate that. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find it on the Odyssey app. I'm Grant McAuley. This has been From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We will catch you next week. And until then, so long, everyone.